Warlocks are quite unique among spellcasters in D&D, with their Pact Magic spellcasting giving them a very limited number of spells, but they're cast at your max level. The kind of spells Warlocks favor compared to other classes changes on top of the fact that Warlocks get their own unique spells. With that in mind, today we'll be going over some of the best Warlock spells that you can get. And starting off at number 10, we have Hex. This is a first level enchantment spell that lasts up to a minute with concentration, and only requires a bonus action. You can place a curse on any creature in a 90-foot range, and any damage you do gains an extra 1d6 necrotic damage on that target. You also get to choose an ability score, and that creature gets disadvantage on those ability checks with that particular ability. Finally, if the creature is reduced to 0 hit points, you can use your bonus action to move the Hex onto another creature. Hex is one of the bread and butter spell options for low-level Warlocks, especially since it's a spell only Warlocks naturally have access to. An extra d6 might not sound like a lot, but at lower levels it really adds up a lot of oomph to a Warlock's attacks, whether it be the Eldritch Blast or a Hexblade Warlock laying attacks into the target. It even capitalizes a bit on the Warlock's unusual spellcasting, where they only cast their highest level spell slots, gaining an 8-hour duration with 3rd and 4th level castings and 24 hours of concentration at their highest. Extra damage is obviously good, but the debuff on ability checks creating disadvantage can be quite useful too. While it won't affect more important rolls like attack or saving throws, it would, for instance, give disadvantage to initiative if you pulled off your Hex before combat and chose dexterity. Or, much more commonly, giving a target disadvantage on strength checks makes it easier to manhandle with effects like grapple, restrain, knock down, or push creatures. This can be a great combo with allies who incorporate these tactics into their arsenal. For instance, a great spell like Web from an allied spellcaster becomes suddenly much harder to deal with if the enemy is trying to break out of the web with disadvantaged strength checks. Hex' only real issue is its viability dries up pretty fast, as Warlocks get higher impact spells to use their concentration on as they gain levels. And even with the increased duration that can let you keep Hex going between combats and short rests, it's typically not worth giving up more powerful options just to get 1 or 2d6 thrown into your damage. But it's still a nearly obligatory early game spell for Warlocks, and it's one of the most thematic important spells to the flavor of Warlock, so that combo lets it sneak in on this list. And with the next spell on this list at number 9, we have Forcecage. This is a 7th level evocation spell that lasts an hour with no need for concentration, though it does require investing 1,500 gold worth of ruby dust. But that dust doesn't get consumed, so it's not a recurring cost. It creates a magical prison made of force around an area within 100 feet of the caster. The prison is invisible, can't move, and can only be up to 20 feet on any side in a cube shape if it's a cage, or up to 10 feet on any side if it's a solid box. Any creature inside can't escape except by magical means, and even those means, such as teleportation or shifting planes, requires a charisma saving throw to work. The cage even stops traveling through it on the ethereal plane. Forcecage is the ultimate timeout box in D&D. It's a super souped up version of spells like Wall of Force, a spell meant to isolate and control specific enemies with impassable blockades of arcane energy. And while Wall of Force has some other utilities, it also requires concentration. Forcecage basically reads that you can eliminate a target from the encounter unless they have a high enough charisma or legendary resistance combined with teleportation, which will allow them to get out. That's probably the most important thing about Forcecage, as it's an incredibly high-level spell and you need to be getting a lot out of it to justify that investment. In the upper echelons of D&D, fights are often riddled with opponents who have preposterous saves or legendary resistances that make any powerful spells trivial, and sometimes they have both, making anything short of buffs and direct damage that works on successful saves feel fruitless sometimes. But Forcecage is a true fight-winning high-level spell. Its absurd range makes it easy to drop on enemies outside of Counterspell range. It's even immune to Dispel Magic. Technically, a casting of Anti-Magic Field would also deal with it, but Anti-Magic Fields deal with every spell effect in the game, so that's not really a knock on Forcecage. The only real knocks on it are the size limitations and its high level. Some gargantuan enemies will be functionally immune to it as they don't fit, or ones that you can only fit into the 20-foot cage version will still be able to employ their own range options through the cage bars. But anything that fits in the 10-foot cube is usually out of the fight, and there's little else in the game worth a 7th level or higher spell slot than a good Forcecage. If more games got to the level 15 and higher, you could expect this fight-defining spell to be even higher on this list, and any other list for casters who have access to it at that. High-level spells have to have a huge impact to be worth it, and Forcecage is one of the prime examples of those. Speaking of which, and at number 8 on this list, we have Synaptic Static. This is a 5th level enchantment spell that causes a blast of psychic energy in a 20-foot radius target on a point in 120 feet of range. Any creatures with 2 intelligence or more makes an intelligence saving throw, suffering 8d6 psychic damage or half as much on a success. A failed save incurs an additional effect, muddling the mind of those who fail for 1 minute. So long as they're affected by this, all attacks, ability checks, and concentration saving throws get a d6 subtracted from their totals. Those still suffering from having their brain scrambled can repeat the intelligence save at the end of their turns to end the effect on a success. Synaptic Static is an incredibly interesting AoE spell. It's easy to compare it unfavorably to Fireball, which deals the same exact damage at a much cheaper cost, and works on brainless enemies that might have 1 or 0 intelligence. Those kind of enemies are few and far between, and Synaptic Static makes up for that with its secondary effect. Afflicting enemies with a souped up but more narrow version of the Bane spell is incredible. Intelligence saves are often the worst saves in enemy stat blocks too, so this effect will commonly land and you'll be dealing the full damage more often than a Fireball or other area of effect damage spells. Taking a d6 off of attack rolls is maybe even better than a Bane's d4, even if Bane reduces saving throws too, since enemies are much more commonly pummeling your team with vicious multi-attacks. Subtracting d6s from that is functionally giving your entire party an average buff of 3.5 AC, while the enemy's brains remain fried by your static. And it does this without eating up your concentration, unlike a Bane spell, all on top of doing good damage and hitting in a great AoE that can easily affect a ton of enemies. As mentioned earlier with Forcecage, high-level combats are often loaded with enemies with strong saves and legendary resistances. So having your fight-changing debuff attack a generally weak save and still do damage no matter what is a great value for a level 5 spell. This is also important specifically for Warlocks, as 5th level spells mark the end of their Pact Magic feature spells, and are the strongest spells they'll be able to recharge on a short rest. So this is the kind of spell you can reasonably be tossing out many times a day if your party is making the best use of your Warlock strengths. Picking out your highest impact 5th level spells is important for mid to late game Warlocks. It's hard to go wrong with the triple whammy of strong damage, strong debuffs, and a high success rate that Synaptic Static offers. And at number 7, we have Misty Step. This is a 2nd level conjuration spell that lets you teleport anywhere you can see within 30 feet of you as a bonus action, so long as the place you're appearing isn't occupied. Misty Step is one of the most simple and effective spells in D&D. Teleportation is the safest way to deal with any number of dangerous situations. Common scenarios such as being stuck in a trap or dangerous area of effect, being surrounded by monsters, or having to supplement your usually lacking physical capabilities as a spellcaster to handle certain obstacles, like jumping over gorges and pits or scaling sheer surfaces. These are all situations in which Misty Step shines. There's quite a few spells that offer teleportation, but most of them are high level and require a full action to use. Getting extra movement as a bonus action is something many classes have access to, such as the Rogue's Cunning Action or a Monk's Step of the Wind, but those are just granting dash actions, which still incur opportunity attacks and other movement punishing effects without some other supplemental effect to save them. And no amount of dash actions will let you escape being grappled, restrained, or maybe locked inside of a magical prison like the previously mentioned Forcecage. Misty Step being a relatively cheap answer to all of these problems, as well as its general usefulness, makes it one of the best spells in the game for any class that has access to it. Admittedly, it doesn't have any direct synergy with the Warlock's unique spellcasting. If anything, the limited number of high-level spells makes its function awkward for a Warlock who might be burning 3rd, 4th, or 5th level spells on this lower range teleportation spell, while something like a Dimension Door can give you more powerful and spell level appropriate effects. And while Dimension Door is a great honorable mention in its own right, Warlocks still benefit a lot in their own unique way from Misty Step. Warlocks, whether it be Hexblades or any other variant, usually pull off a lot of their damage with their action and without explicitly needing a leveled spell slot to do it. Being able to teleport with the Misty Step and still dish out tons of damage with a simple Eldritch Blast or Green Flame Blade cantrip gives Misty Step added value specifically for Warlocks compared to a Wizard or Sorcerer who might be stuck throwing a Pitiless Firebolt compared to you. In any such case, Misty Step is not just great, it's nearly irreplaceable in its effect, earning it a spot on this list. And at number 6, we have Counterspell. This is a 3rd level conjuration spell that lets you as a reaction cause a spell being cast to have no effect if it's 3rd level or lower, so long as it's within 50 feet range. If the spell is higher than 3rd level, you can make a spellcasting ability check at 10 plus the spell's level to still counter it. Or if Counterspell is cast at a higher level, so long as its level is equal to or higher than the spell you are countering, it will successfully counter it. Counterspell is one of the most powerful reaction spells in the game. This makes it fairly unique, as reaction spells tend to be very narrow in their use, like Featherfall or a mediocre burst of damage like Hellish Rebuke. Counterspell trades your reaction for, usually, a full action from an enemy. And not only is it an action, but it's a spell. And spells tend to be the most high-powered, high-impact actions a creature can take if they do cast spells. Without Counterspell, typically you and your party are forced to just suffer the horrible effects of whatever that vile enemy is casting at you. Whether it be massive AoE damage, some kind of powerful controlling spell that might hamstring your entire party or take control of someone, or even something plot critical like the enemy attempting to flee with teleportation. Spells are such a fundamental part of Dungeons & Dragons that even enemies that aren't defined strictly as spellcasters often have incidental spells they can cast as part of their stat block, or even alternative spellcasting variants like with dragons and mind flayers. Action economy is everything, and Counterspell is arguably the greatest use of the often underused reaction part of a spellcaster's action economy. The biggest downside is that Counterspell is a bit of a mixed bag for Warlocks, as they only get 2 or 3 spells per combat. Typically, a Warlock's biggest choke point on powerful actions isn't always action economy, but is instead throwing out 2 high-powered spells themselves and hoping that's enough impact in a fight. On the other hand, Warlocks can both recover from a Counterspell slinging encounter fairly easily, and are the best spellcasters at being an impactful party member in a combat with no spells at all, thanks to their Eldritch Blast focus. Counterspell could be a bit higher or a bit lower on this list, depending on how you feel about these factors. But it's still one of the absolute best spells available to anyone who has it in their spell list, and that includes the Warlock. And at number 5 on the list, we have Suggestion. This is a 2nd level enchantment spell that lasts up to 8 hours with concentration. It allows you to speak some course of action, limited to a sentence or two, to a creature you can see within 30 feet. So long as the creature can understand you, and the course of action seems reasonable, they get a wisdom saving throw, and on a failure, attempt to complete that course of action, ending the spell when they do. Unreasonable actions are described as being self-destructive, like asking the creature to set itself on fire or jump off a cliff, and you and your allies harming the creature will, likewise, cause the spell to fail. Suggestion is a pretty powerful, if somewhat conditional spell. It's one of the few socially powerful enchantments that doesn't automatically let your target know that they were magically messed with, and it doesn't have any disadvantage against opponents in combat like many charm spells do, like with Charm Person or Friends. This makes it function like a buffed up long-term command or a weaker but cheaper dominate spell. While you can't use it in combat to make an enemy blow themselves up, you can tell them to drop all their gear and flee for their lives. Or, depending on your DM's interpretation of reasonable, betray their enemies and attack them if you word it to be beneficial to them, such as telling them they should join your side and you'll let them live, but with magical force backing it up. It's clearly amazing outside of combat, letting you bypass guards or influence major social encounters. Tell that guard to go home and get some sleep, or enchant the haughty socialite to spend the rest of the party singing your praises. It's a great spell for anyone. Though, as is becoming a theme with these middle-of-the-list spells, it does have some pros and cons when you see how it functions with the Warlock's unique nature. It doesn't get any benefit from upcasting, meaning that level 5 and up Warlocks will be trading down on their spell slot power to cast Suggestion. But it has an 8-hour duration, meaning you can set up a useful suggestion and leverage a short rest to get the spell slot back. Something as simple as suggesting a combat-capable non-player character to aid you to the best of their ability for the next 8 hours can give you the equivalent of a summoning spell with a much longer duration if used cleverly. Suggestion's power comes in the somewhat vague wording it has. It can be utterly game-breaking, but a DM can also crack down on what a reasonable suggestion might be. expanding unreasonable suggestions outside of the spell's description of just self-harming demands. Still, one of the best spells in general that interacts in a fairly interesting way with the Warlock's Pact Magic. And at number 4, we have Armor of Agathys. This is a Warlock exclusive level 1 abjuration spell that lasts for 1 hour with no concentration. It gives you 5 temporary hit points, and so long as you have those temporary hit points, any creature that does melee damage to you takes 5 cold damage. Armor of Agathys is one of the most unique spells for a Warlock. It's not too impressive as a level 1 spell. While 5 temporary hit points is actually a significant buff of a player's survivability in the highly lethal 1st and 2nd levels, 5 damage is not a lot to get out of your only spell slot at level 1. Compare that to a Hex, which can reasonably dish out several d6s of damage, and it's a losing comparison. But Armor of Agathys was clearly designed with the Warlock's habit of upcasting in mind. Every level you upcast it, it gains another 5 temporary hit points and 5 cold damage. So a 2nd level Armor of Agathys is twice as good as a 1st level, and a 3rd level is 3 times as good, and so on and so on. But it's actually even better than that, as there's a 2nd benefit to the temporary hit point pool getting so large. It means that if an enemy doesn't take out all of your temporary hit points in one blow, a 2nd blow will still incur the huge chunk of cold damage. The potential to double up on the damage for Armor of Agathys takes it from a pretty good survivability spell with a decent damage component to a pretty good survivability spell with an extremely powerful damage component. Once you start getting 15 or 20 hit points from the spell, it's very common for enemies at that level to have multi-attack in their stat block, and really pay the price for daring to lay a hand on you. And even if an enemy is hitting you really hard once instead of several times, a huge chunk of temporary hit points is really good against single large attacks for survivability reasons. It's basically trading for a high value enemy action in the process. And since Armor of Agathys has a generous 1 hour duration, it's very easy to have it up and ready in anticipation of a fight. A powerful spell that doesn't cost any actions during combat is extremely good, even if it is using up your limited spell slots. A fun combination is getting the Meta Magic Adept feat to access Extended Spell, letting you double the duration up to 2 hours, letting you armor up, short rest the spell slot back, and then have a full hour of the armor ready to go. Though that's hardly the most powerful use of meta magic on a Warlock spell, the simple fact that Armor of Agathys has such utility in its duration is a big plus for it. The go-to defensive spell for most arcane casters tends to be the Shield spell. And while only Hexblade gets access to Shield amongst Warlocks, that spell isn't too great on a Warlock that isn't focusing on AC. After all, blowing a 3rd level or higher spell slot for Shield completely removes what makes it so good for other classes, and becomes way too costly for a Warlock with any levels under their belt. Speaking of Hexblade, all of these benefits gain increased value for that incredibly popular subclass, which likes to turn the Warlock into an up-close damage dealer. All of those temporary hit points really help with the survivability of a DA hit die class that might otherwise not have the sheer number of hit points needed to stay up on the front lines compared to other martial frontliners. Armor of Agathys is a well-designed, powerful, and useful spell designed just for the Warlock and a great inclusion in any Warlock spell list. And next at number 3 on this list, we have Summon Fae. This is a 3rd level conjuration spell that lasts for up to 1 hour with concentration. It also requires a 300 gold valued Gilded Flower, but just like with Forcecage's Ruby Dust, this component isn't consumed, so it's a one-time investment. The spell conjures forth a Fae spirit ally to an unoccupied space within 90 feet. The Fae disappears when the spell ends, or if it drops to 0 hit points. It follows your commands with no actions required, and you get to choose between 3 variants of the Fae, either Fuming, Mirthful, or Tricksy. Summon Fae is part of a big family of spells that summons a singular ally based on a particular type of monster. Summon Fae is one of the lowest level ones, which is a point in its favor over some of the other options because these spells are always quite good, and getting them early, like with Summon Fae, gets you a lot more uses of them. The long duration, like many spells already mentioned, lets you cast it preemptively to have the ally out and about before you even get into combat. That said, it's powerful enough that using the action in combat isn't a big downside either. Summon Fae also stands out because of the solid versatility and action economy the Fae comes equipped with, on top of having a very good attack, base damage-wise, dealing 2d6 plus some typical bonuses every summon gets. It also comes with a bonus action to teleport 30 feet. This is a huge advantage, as many of these summons lack impactful bonus actions. A free Misty Step is great, but this bonus action also gets bonus effects based on which variant you choose. Fuming gets advantage on its next attack, Mirthful gets to cast a charming effect on any creature within 10 feet of it, forcing a wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC, and Trixie can fill a 5-foot square with darkness. All of these effects are excellent. The darkness can really hamper enemy line of sight if used smartly, and shines in a restricted environment. The advantage on attacks is obviously good for consistent damage, and the charming effect can be game-breaking. A basically free, better version of Charm Person spell being fired off every turn can completely turn a fight all on its own. And that's just the bonus action of a creature you summon that it gets entirely on its own turn. If that wasn't enough, this spell is especially good for Warlock, because all of the summon spells get awesome scaling benefits based on being cast at higher levels. For instance, going from 3rd to 4th levels gets this Face Spirit an increase of 1 AC, 10 hit points, an extra point of damage on its attack, and an entire second attack. All of those bonuses add up every upcast level, except the multi-attack, which happens every other spell level on evens like 4th and 6th level. Regardless, the fact that this is both an awesome spell at 3rd and 4th level makes it a prime choice for any mid-game Warlock who wants a spell that's going to be good no matter what spell level they're casting as they grow in power. The other summon spells are similarly good, and you can make different arguments for each of them. But Summon Fae just brings so much to the table, and does so while coming in as early as possible, making it the winner of this high spot on the Warlock spell list. And at number 2 on this list, we have Hunger of Hadar. This is a Warlock exclusive 3rd level conjuration spell that lasts for up to 1 minute with concentration. This spell creates a 20-foot radius sphere of magical darkness at a point within 150 feet. The spell thematically creates slurpy noises and whispers that can be heard up to 30 feet away. The area inside is difficult terrain, any creature that starts their turn in it suffers 2d6 cold damage, and any creature that ends its turn there makes a dexterity save or suffers 2d6 acid damage from tentacles from another world rubbing against them. Hunger of Hadar is a disgusting spell, both in power level and because it's a gross sphere of slurpy, tentacle-filled darkness. Usually, the top spot for a 3rd level AoE spell is like Hypnotic Pattern. And frankly, you could argue Hypnotic Pattern is still stronger than the spell and deserves this spot instead. But Hunger of Hadar really deserves recognition for being a spell with so many great effects crammed into one spell that only Warlocks get access to. While none of the individual effects of Hunger match Hypnotic Pattern's stupefying effects on enemies, the fact that this spell also creates an impenetrable wall of darkness that even magical light can't illuminate makes it really good at cutting battlefields in half and taking line of sight away from enemies. The huge AoE difficult terrain lets it do a solid spike growth impersonation at restricting enemy movement, and the added multiple instances of damage even lets it clear out weak enemies or punish any enemy who's stuck in it, either from being blocked off by terrain, your party, or some other effect like being forcefully moved back into it multiple times. That 20-foot radius is functionally bigger than Pattern's 30-foot square, and it even comes with a 30-foot range boost to boot. Warlocks can even specifically abuse Hunger of Hadar with their Devil Sights invocation that lets them see into the Hadar's huge sphere of darkness and start laying further attacks like Eldritch Blast on their helpless foes, which itself comes with powerful combos that will get their own focus. Usually, Hypnotic Pattern and Fireball dominate the conversation for an arcane caster's big level 3 spells. And while Warlocks don't get access to Fireball, outside of certain subclasses, Hunger of Hadar deserves its place in the conversation of fight-defining 3rd level spells. You can't go wrong with any of these options. But Hadar's unique nature and combination of effects, and only being available to Warlocks, just barely edges out the other options for Warlocks, and earns it a pretty highly contested number 2 spot on the list. And to no one's surprise, the number 1 Warlock spell has to go to Eldritch Blast. This is a cantrip that deals 1d10 force damage on a range attack roll to any creature within 120 feet. It gains an extra attack as it gains levels, from 2 blasts at 5 to 3 at 11th, and finally 4 at 17th level, with each blast getting their own attack roll. Eldritch Blast is the true bread and butter of the Warlock class. The entire class is basically designed around the idea that this cantrip is powerful enough to let the Warlock do a pretty great impression of a martial class and their ability to pump out damage with a single action. While most damaging cantrips gain increased damage as you level, Eldritch Blast's gaining of attacks makes it simply the best scaling spell in the game. It's so good that many charisma-based classes will drop 1 or 2 levels in Warlock just to get Eldritch Blast, as an insanely good range attack option, since the level scaling doesn't care if those levels are in Warlock or not. The spell is particularly great with Warlocks because of the extreme focus one of the Warlock's main class features, the Eldritch Invocations, grant the cantrip. The obvious one is Agonizing Blast, which gives the spell a bonus in damage equal to your charisma. This doubly, triply, and quadruple scales as you level, which is the main reason that Eldritch Blast scales so well no matter what stage of the game you're in damage-wise. Maybe more game-breaking though is other effects that Warlocks can bestow on the cantrip. Eldritch Spear gives the spell a 300-foot range, making you capable of dishing out damage like a sniper at a range basically nothing else in the game can operate at to challenge you, and maybe the most abusable invocation is Repelling Blast, which lets you push a creature 10 feet away from you in a straight line when you hit it with an Eldritch Blast. Usually, force movement effects like this require contested strength rolls or at least saving throws, but not this one. You want to send someone off a cliff? Shoot them twice and send them flying 20 feet. This works incredibly well with persistent area of effect abilities, like the previously mentioned Hunger of Hadar. Imagine an enemy gasping for breath as they escape your dark tentacle-filled zone of madness, only for you to send them back into the horrid place with a couple of well-placed Eldritch Blasts. Warlocks also get the inverse of this effect with Grasp of Hadar, an invocation that pulls a creature 10 feet closer when you hit them with an Eldritch Blast, though you can only use this effect once a turn. Still powerful, though typically a little less powerful and abusable than Repelling Blast. There's even an invocation that slows creatures down called Lance of Lethargy, removing 10 feet of movement when you hit them. If the enemy doesn't have any range options to deal with this basically just lets a Warlock play an infinite game of keep away with most enemies in the game when combined with Repelling Blast. There's so much power and so much versatility loaded into this one little cantrip. Despite being the most simple kind of spell, it has the most complexity and versatility of basically any damage spell in the game in the hands of a Warlock. It's equivalent to a class feature all on its own, and only Warlocks natively have access to it. It's the best spell that Warlocks get entirely because they're Warlocks, easily earning the #1 spot on this list.